Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
What's up, guys? It's Darren. Welcome to the show. Now, sometimes you find out about a concert last minute or a big event. Maybe it's an artist you've always wanted to see. You just learn he's in town and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to buy tickets. Well, that often happens to MBA applicants too. As much as I encourage you all to get started on the application process early, I understand that many times a decision is made last minute to apply for MBA programs. On this week's show, I brought in Clare Simonis, who's from the US, who actually came to Touch MBA with about 1 month left to go before her first round applications were due. She was applying to the top schools. We're talking HBS, Stanford, MIT Sloan, Berkeley Haas. She was scrambling to put her application together in such a short time, and she eventually got into HBS. So what I did this week with Clare is really talk to her about how she did it, what was her strategy with her back against the wall, what did she focus on, what parts of the application did she think were most important, and then after she got interview invites, we also discuss preparing for interviews and, of course, making that final decision on where to go. So I think those of you last-minute applicants will get some good tips from this episode. And although it's not the ideal situation, sometimes we have to make do with what we have. So I hope you find this episode useful. Also, like Clare, many applicants come to touchmba.com to get some free school selection advice, to get some free profile feedback. It's a way to quickly kind of assess your competitiveness at your target schools, assess what other business schools might be good options for you, and to get a third-person objective or more objective point of view on how you can improve your profile. So go check that out at touchmba.com. And Clare also joined our Admissions Edge forum and course, breaking down step-by-step the key things you need to do in each part of your application to succeed. We also have a forum there where you can ask me or questions, basically just to get some extra guidance during the process. You can check that out at touchmba.com/course. And now on to my conversation with Clare. Here we go. I'm really happy to have our next guest on the show because she's a former listener turned applicant turned soon-to-be MBA student. Clare Simonis came to our site last year for help, but she just recently got into HBS, and I had to get her on the show to learn more about how she was able to do that. So, Clare, thank you so much for your time. I know it's the middle of your work day, but thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Darren.
So, Clare, could you just give a brief, introduction of your background and, what you were doing before you decided to apply to business school?
Yeah, for sure. I studied business and Asian languages and literature in college. And then right after college, I joined Deloitte's strategy consulting group in the US and spent 2 years there. I really enjoyed my experience, but after 2 years, I decided I wanted experience working in a growing business, either a startup or a new division. So that's what I did. I transitioned to an internal strategy role at a new division within a healthcare company. I've been there now about a year and a half. And over the summer, I was thinking, maybe do I want an MBA? I'm not really sure. I had thought about it in the past, but I was talking to some of my friends in late July who were applying in round one. And that's when my wheels started turning and really thinking about it again. And so I applied this fall to programs, and I'll be going to HBS this fall.
Yeah, and I'm so pumped for you, so excited for you.
Thanks.
What an amazing place to get into and to attend. But so I just want to point out to our listeners that although on this podcast I've stressed a lot that you need to prepare early. You need to get started researching schools early, kind of figuring out your positioning early on. Claire, in your case, you were what I'd call a rather last minute applicant. I mean, right?
Scrambler.
That's a scrambler. Yeah. And that's the truth of applying to business school is that, as much as people want to be completely prepared, to apply, sometimes, you're inspired at the last minute, or you realize, your work situation or your personal situation requires you to apply right away. So I think you're not the only one in this boat. So we're really going to focus in this episode on last minute application tips, how to apply when, you have a month left, as you did, to put your application together. I want to give a little bit of background, a little bit more background on you, if you don't mind. Yeah. Just that, you did score very well on the GMAT. You scored a 740, and you were the valedictorian of your class, which is super impressive. So I just want all our listeners to take this with a grain of salt that you had a lot going for you, working for Deloitte, scoring well in your GMAT and performing excellently in your undergrad. So your friends are starting to apply. You're starting to hear some chatter, right, from your friends applying to business school.
Yeah.
When did you take the GMAT? Did you take it, a long time ago? Or?
So I had taken it. I will say that. If I would have tried to cram in the GMAT and all of this, it would have been a bit of a, even more of a scramble.
Yes.
I had taken the GMAT right after I graduated college. I took 2 weeks. I wasn't working, and I just spent every day studying and then took it then. So I think if I would have tried to do that this fall, in addition to working and putting together the actual application itself, that would have been pretty tough. I'd have needed a couple extra weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, first tip there, take the GMAT as close to college as possible when you're still in test taking mode. Right? So you did really well on that test. Okay, so there's 1 month before the Harvard Business School deadline, which was September 7th. And so what did you prioritize with 1 month left to go before the deadline?
Yeah, so in listening to your podcast and talking to friends, I realized I needed to figure out, well, first of all, I kind of was thinking, okay, what do I actually need to get done before I apply? The big things to me were figuring out the essays and getting my recommenders a heads up that I wanted them to write letters of recommendation, just to be as respectful as I could about their time, even though I was already kind of cutting it close. And so those to me were the biggest things I needed to work on. But before I really got dug myself into the essays and gave my letters or my recommenders ideas of what they should be writing about, I needed to figure out what my story was, which at the time I was still I'm not sure if I even really want to go to school. I mean, I have ideas of what I want to do, and I kind of have a story, but not really. So that to me was the first thing that I just needed to do as much soul searching as I could in a very short period, and kind of just have an outline of what I thought my story was, so I could notify my recommenders and at least have some, big picture ideas of the direction of my essays.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that story. I mean, how did you kind of hash that out? Was it with friends? Was it, did you just cram and do it on your own? How did you go about figuring that out?
Yeah, good question. Definitely a bit of both. I started by just thinking to myself about, why do I really want an MBA, and why am I looking for a pivot in my career right now? And I just took time during lunch and whenever I could to take a long walk. That's kind of what I find works for me. Take a long walk and just be thinking about, what is it that I want to do? And I think that's the beauty of the application process, is that you kind of have ideas leading up to it of, okay, yeah, maybe I want to do this and this is what I'm interested in. But the application process really makes you put that into writing and into cohesive thoughts. And after I felt okay, I'm feeling pretty comfortable about this, I would bounce ideas off my friends to make sure that they thought that sounded like me. Not that I was trying to sound anything different than myself, but
Right.
I just wanted to make sure that what I was saying really, was in line with my personality and what I was trying to achieve.
Right. So when you submitted your profile at our site, for some school selection help, your career goal at the time was you were targeting startups in the health and technology sectors, right? That was kind of your goal, having worked as a consultant and then for your previous healthcare company. Did that change? Or, during that reflection process, did you kind of change your ideas for what you wanted to do and what schools you were looking at?
No, that actually stayed pretty constant as far as like an underlying idea of what I want to do. And that's still kind of where I am today. I don't know exactly what that will look like, whether it's, starting my own company, hopefully someday, or working for a startup in somewhere in the healthcare world or health and wellness world. So that was where my thoughts started and also where they landed in the application process.
Yes. Okay. And you also applied to other schools, right? Harvard wasn't the only school you applied to.
Correct. Yeah, I applied to Harvard, Berkeley, Stanford, and MIT.
Okay. So all not too shabby, all very strong programs, very highly ranked programs. So you were targeting 4 programs in the first round. You said you were first trying to figure out your story. I mean, was there another part to your story aside from your career plans? I mean, if you don't mind sharing, what was that story for you?
Yeah. So I guess my career plans kind of align with my personal story. Like when I was in high school, I was pretty unhealthy. I was really overweight. I wasn't very active. And through healthy eating habits and nutrition and exercise, I really transformed my life.
Wow.
And so that's kind of been something that I've been interested in personally throughout, the last 5 or 10 years is, making myself healthier and trying to share those habits with my family and friends. And that's kind of aligning with where I want to go in my career. I really like being in a position at a company that's aimed at helping people be healthier. And so that's kind of how I rolled it into a kind of cohesive life and career story. I knew I was interested in startups, but I was thinking, okay, well, if this really is my personal interest, health and wellness, why can't I dream big and say that that's what I want to do with my career life too?
That's great. So you rolled in that personal and professional together. Did you have to present or think about, long-term sort of vision for yourself? Was that part of your story, or was it more, focused on immediately after the MBA?
I was more focused on immediately after the MBA, a bit in the application and also the interviews.
Yes.
Because I think, to be honest, I don't really know where I'm going to be in 10 or 15 years. I mean, I think my stretch dream goal is to someday own my own company. And so I said that in my application process and interviews, but I think I also had to be honest with myself and honest with them that that's maybe not going to happen. And I have ideas of other things I would be interested in. So, but that I didn't have one clear, final end point that was this is what I'm going to be in 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds authentic and true to you, right? And that's interesting. And so, okay, let's take a step back. So you're applying to 4 schools. You just figured out this story, got your story together, cohesive. And now, did you approach the same 2 recommenders for all 4 schools?
I did. They're saints.
I was going to say, right, 1 month. That's 4 recommendations. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Luckily there are 2 people that one for my current job, my current boss, who I work closely with and was really supportive about me applying. And he's just was very open to doing this for me. And then an old boss at Deloitte who is an awesome guy, and they were both just very accommodating, especially given the timeline. I know one of my recommenders, he was writing letters of recommendation for someone else who was applying, and I gave him a deadline for the recommendation. So the other applicant was thinking way ahead, where I was kind of rolling this into a last minute thing. But yeah, the same two recommenders for all 4 schools.
Wow. Okay. That's awesome. So you built up those relationships. I mean, was there, looking back, what do you think was the most important part of that application process for you?
I think just coming up with this story and was, I think to me, what ended up making my applications somewhat, strong, or at least complement some of my strengths, was just having that story and using themes of that throughout all of my essays. I had tried writing one essay before I'd really thought about what my story was, and I sent it to a friend for feedback, and he was, politely, he's told me that it looks like you just wrote a bunch of Post-notes on a wall of things you did and put it into an essay, and it doesn't really say much about you other than, you did some cool things in the past, but it doesn't really mean much to your application. So I think really doing some soul searching and figuring out how I wanted my application to reflect what my story and what my genuine goals are, and translating that into words for the essays was the hardest part, but also the most important part.
I mean, so HBS and Stanford have 2 of the most notoriously difficult essay questions, right? So the HBS question is, what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy for the MBA program? There's no word limit for that. And then Stanford, of course, has the what matters most to you and why question that drives a lot of applicants crazy. You applied to Berkeley, and I was looking at their essays, and I didn't realize this, but their first essay was, if you could choose one song that expresses who you are, what is it and why? So my question to you is, where did you start? Did you start with, for example, did you try to, once you had your story, did you try to answer that Stanford question first, or the HBS question, or did it matter for you?
I actually did start with even though the HBS timeline was the first one, that was MIT, then Stanford, and then Berkeley was last. I started with the Stanford one because I thought that was the hardest. And if I could figure out some of my stories or how I wanted to portray myself in that, I could, kind of borrow themes throughout some of the other essays. So I did start with that one. I found the Berkeley essays to be a little, not easier, but a little less daunting because they're shorter.
That's right.
Except for the last one. And the GSB one really makes you think about, what do you value? So that's the story part. And then it also, you touch on, and I don't remember if it's the same essay or another essay. I guess the essay after that's about why GSB.
Why Stanford. Exactly.
Yeah. And that just kind of gave me a good starting point that was like the backbone of a lot of the other essays.
Yeah. And I mean, would you mind sharing what you wrote for your HBS essay? I mean, not, in terms of what angle you took.
Yeah. So I really focused on that, personal part of my life that I shared about becoming a healthier person, and really focused that around my journey, that from, being kind of an unhealthy person to being a healthy person, and then kind of broaden that personal story into why I've done what I've done in my career and what I want to do and why, to make it just a more focused essay. It is really hard to think about how you're going to narrow, something, all the things that you've done and all the things you want to do into one story, but I tried to just simplify things as easily as possible. I remember there was a info session. It was joint with a couple schools, like the Yale was there, Berkeley was there, and they had a pretty helpful roundtable event that was all about the application process. And I remember one of the Yale admissions officers just saying, when you write so much stuff in your essays, about all the different things you've done, and the less simple it is, the more we're just going to kind of zone out, and it's not going to stand out, which I thought was something that was a helpful piece of advice.
Was that difficult for you to share such a personal story, with Harvard Business School, talking about kind of your struggles with your health?
Yes and no. I think it was at first hard to make it sound genuinely personal, and also, keeping in mind that it's a professional program and not, making it a sob story and making it sound like, I'm not trying to go for a sympathy vote here. I'm just, trying to explain why I've done what I've done. So that was kind of the hard part of finding that balance between, keep it interesting and read like a personal story, but also keep it professional. But the part that made the whole essay writing easier was that it was something that was really important in my life, and I wasn't trying to sound a certain way or make things up. So it was a lot more natural.
Yeah. And did you have a lot of friends or colleagues attending these 4 schools that you were targeting?
I had someone at every school, not a ton, but there was at least one person at every school that I could talk to about the program and their experience there. Yeah.
And did that help you or not really?
Yeah, it did a lot, especially when it helped in a lot of ways. It helped with just hearing about their experience at the school, especially for the essays that are focused on why this school. And it also helped a lot just hearing about their experiences when I was thinking about how would I prioritize these schools if, I had my pick, where would I want to go? Because when I first started applying, HBS was at the bottom of my list. I wasn't going to apply initially. I just, I didn't know if a program that big was for me. I didn't know if the case method was for me. And then after talking with people, I realized that I think I would actually really like the case method, and decided that in the end that it was my top choice. So yeah, it was really helpful having people at those schools that I could talk to.
You applied to all 4 schools. You heard back from some of them that yes, you've got an interview, right? Mm-hmm. So how did you prepare for those interviews? What was your strategy there?
So I did use the people that I knew at those schools as resources to just ask them about what the interview process is like. Also just did a lot of Googling to see, who's going to be, what to expect. What is the environment like? Is it an AdCom person or is it an alumni? So once I kind of figured out the lay of the land, I tried to, think about, okay, what are the questions I think they're going to ask me? And I approached the interviews a little differently based on what I had heard. Like I had heard that to think of the HBS interview as like an interview for the case method, and that they would pick apart just something really small in your application and just have you talk about it the whole time. And that's exactly how my interview was. So what was the one thing they focused on in your application? We talked basically the whole time about the division of the company that I work for and why it's important to my company's overall strategy. Yeah. Which was luckily for me an easier thing to talk about than some other things I've heard people having to talk about. Like one guy said that he had something, not even in an essay, but somewhere in one of those just like input forms on the application, he had in there an activity that he did in high school, and they talked about that the whole time. I think everyone has a similar experience in the fact that the interviewer is just going to latch onto some random topic, but a different experience in the types of things that they want the applicant to be talking about in the interview. And what about Berkeley and MIT? How did you prepare for those interviews? So MIT was with an admissions committee person. So that one I had heard it was pretty kind of standard behavioral based questions. And so for that one, I just made flashcards about a bunch of questions, like interview questions, and would practice, which is, I don't know if that's the right or wrong way, but it was fine. Yeah. And then Berkeley and Stanford's interviews were both with alumni. So those two I kind of grouped together in a separate bucket. and had heard that they were a little more informal interviews. And I had expected them to be more conversational. So I just kind of practiced talking more about my story and my decisions about where I am today, and thought about, questions that I'd want to ask them to, number one, show that I'm interested in the person who's interviewing you, but also just legitimately wanted to know some things about their experience as well.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel like you got better at those interviews as, you did each of them? Or were they all kind of different?
I got less nervous maybe, but they were all pretty different.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of one of the harder things to prepare for a little bit, because you just don't know what they're going to talk to you about. But I would say that if you're being genuine in your application, and the more genuine your story is and how you want to come across, the easier the interview process is going to be. Yeah.
When you're researching and preparing for these interviews, or even, when you were writing your essays for these schools, I'm sure you saw, the forums and, some of the leading websites like Poets and Quants. I'm just wondering, what was your approach there? I mean, did you use those sites? Did you tune them out? Because I think that's a big struggle for a lot of applicants, and you're applying last minute. So I'm wondering, how you treated that whole thing.
So I tried not to stress myself out about it too much. And I also didn't want to sound too canned. So I don't know. Everything you read online, you have to take with somewhat of a grain of salt. So I would read some people's posts about their interview experience, and it was totally different than someone else's interview experience. So I just wanted to understand, what's the environment going to be just so that I'm comfortable with what the situation is going to look like when I'm interviewing. And then I think just talking to someone who was just recently through the process was the most helpful versus reading things online. Although, I mean, to use all the resources is, a good idea too. So looking online can't hurt, but I think just talking to a couple people that have been through the process recently is a really good way to figure out how to prepare.
And how did you make your final decision on attending Harvard over the other schools?
Yeah. Well, I got into Harvard and Berkeley. Those are the 2 out of the 4. So out of those 2, I was thinking about, what am I really trying to get out of an MBA? I picked all 4 schools because they have a strong focus on entrepreneurship, and their strong programs and good brand reputation. And at the end of the day, I was just really, really impressed with the resources at Harvard for entrepreneurs. In addition to having an entrepreneurship center within the business center or the business school, they have what's called the iLab, which is a innovation lab that is for anyone affiliated with Harvard. So business school students can partner with medical school students and engineering students to work on entrepreneurship ideas. So I think that was one of the main drivers in my decision.
That's great. And I mean, I guess, you've been through this whole process now. It's been, 5-6 months?
Yeah, feels longer, but
yeah. I mean, it's like a war, but so, you've been through this whole process, you've gone into a great school. So it's worked out for you in that sense. But would you do anything differently if you had to do it all over again?
I would definitely give myself more time. I was very happy I had taken the GMAT. So I would say if people are even thinking about business school, the sooner you can get it done, the better. And then you'll give yourself more options about, when you can apply if you do decide to apply. Yeah. If I would have had more time, I think it would have been really beneficial in just spending that time to self-reflect and really hone in on a story versus trying to cram that into a week-long soul-searching exercise. I could have, spent a month thinking about that before drafting essays.
Yeah. You could have taken a lot more walks. right?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, it's such an intimidating process for so many listeners. I mean, what advice do you have to give them in terms of, because you've interacted with so many people from these schools now, right? So I'm just wondering, like, if you had any advice in terms of what tone to take or what approach to take when you're interacting with people from the universities, whether that's like admissions people or, alumni, current students, your interviewer. I'm just wondering, like, did you have a certain mindset about the whole process?
Yeah. So when I was talking to people in the programs, I was very honest with them and just said, hey, I'm, thinking about applying. I mean, luckily I was, I guess, I knew them all from either work or they were friends, that I was able to talk to them pretty candidly about, I'm thinking about applying. Can you give me advice? What do you like about the school? What don't you like about the school? And I would say that approach is a little bit different if you're interacting with an admissions committee member at an event or emailing. I think I don't know if you really want to give away that you're thinking about applying, or you might be, interested in the program. You probably want to sound a little more interested in that you are going to be applying, because in the end, they want to have people accept their admissions offers. So I guess I took a little bit different approach, whether I was talking to current students who, don't really have any skin in the game, and they're not, well, for the most part, I will say some students do interview student or applicants, which might be a little bit different, but I was talking to people just informally. Yeah. Yeah.
And any last tips from Clare Simonis? Tell us the secret, Claire. Tell us the secret. How did you do it? There's got to be a secret, right?
Lots of walking.
Lots of walking is the secret.
I would say too, what I wish I would have done also if I would have had more time is, like, make sure that you do want to apply, and make sure that you make sure that's something that you really want to do, instead of just, doing it just to do it. I know some people that, spent the time applying because they felt like they were going to be time crunched and are admitted and weren't sure that they wanted to go. And now they're feeling like, oh, I put all this time into the process and I'm not really sure if I want to go, but like the offer's right there. So I think spending time up front as well, just, seeing if this is something that you really do want to do for the right reasons is helpful as well.
Yeah. I mean, actually on that note, I have another question. So I think this is a dilemma that a lot of applicants face that want to jump into the startup world or want to start their own businesses. And that's, the expense of a business school, both time-wise and tuition-wise, right? And clearly you've thought through this and you've committed, but I'm wondering, what kind of tipped the scales? Because I'm sure that might have been a concern of yours, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that was something I talked a lot about with current students and alumni and admissions officers about, because that is still something that I'm not sure if I am making the right or wrong choice by going or not going. But I feel confident that I will have the resources that I will need to be successful if I do want to start my own business. And so I just kind of looked at all the different benefits of going to business school versus not. I mean, the big benefit of skipping business school and trying to do something yourself or work at a startup is you're not spending the money on tuition. But if you do decide to go to business school, there are a lot of benefits that are tangible and intangible. You're getting all this great mentorship help. You have this great network of people. You're learning skills that'll be helpful. And so those are, kind of the intangible things that you're getting in the business school experience. But I think there's also a way to translate that into monetary value. There are programs at schools that will give you seed money if you are in a competition. So there's opportunities to actually get funding for your idea. And then something that someone said once that really hit me was there is a huge monetary value if you are going to start a business by going to business school and having those 2 years to practice being an entrepreneur. And let's say you started a company in school and it doesn't go as planned, but you learned a list of 20 things that could help you the next time you try to start a company. And those decisions and those lessons can really save you money in the future if you're starting a company again. So I really kind of weighed the pros and cons and decided that if I do want to start my own thing someday, I'm not going to regret going to business school.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such an interesting time as kind of the workforce is changing and more people are, want to and are starting their companies. I mean, I know you're in Austin, Texas, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, hot place for startups.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you might have some friends, doing stuff. But anyways, it's probably another podcast topic, but I think this is really interesting in terms of people who want to pursue that entrepreneurship path, whether you're going to HBS or GSB or, trying to apply to programs like Y Combinator, for example.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting how this kind of scene is changing and evolving, but we'll save that one for another episode. But Claire, thank you so much for joining the show. I love talking to listeners. It makes me happy and proud if I'm if I could allow myself to be. But
you
congratulations.
Should be.
Yeah.
Thank you. The podcast was really helpful, especially as I was thinking through just the application process and also thinking about what's my list of schools I'm going to apply to. So yeah, thank you for everything you guys have done.
Yeah, and I hope to follow your journey. Maybe we can get you on the pod. I know you're going to be a busy first year school student, but I'd love to, have like a follow-up episode and get you on to talk about, after 1 year, where are you? And then after you graduate, how you're doing. I think it'd be fun to track your progress if you're up for it.
I'd love that.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Claire.
All right. Thanks, Darren.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your number one school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.